I finally entered the apartment complex and was greeted by a sobbing Colleen. I ran over to her and hugged her. Once she calmed down, I asked if she was okay, but she shook her head in the negative. Then Dad walked over to us, took Colleen from my arms, and pointed towards my sister's room. When I walked through the doors, I saw tubes and wires connected to them. I saw my mom talking to the doctor and asked how did they get into this condition. Dana's health seemed to be getting better till last night. How could their health deteriorate so much, so rapidly? The doctor looked towards me. My mother shook her head, and the doctor said, "We think they were going through a surge. It's the final rest of energy before dying." I watched my mom leave the room and head towards the living room. The doctor looked me in the eyes and said, "I know this must be hard for you to hear, but your sisters are already gone, and your parents have tried everything possible to save them. Now is the time for you to show your love for them." I felt tears run down my face as I said, "They are not gone, as they are still breathing." He let out a breath and said, "Yes, they are alive, but they can breathe only with the help of the machines." He walked over to the machine and pointed towards the screen. "See these lines? They measure brainwaves. If neurons were firing, these lines would have waves. But as you can see, these are flat." I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand and said, "It's not fair. Why did my sisters have to go through this?" He patted me on the back and said, "I don't know, young lady, but you should think about them escaping this trauma and going to a better place." I kept my head up and walked over to them. I kissed them on the forehead and started to walk out of the bedroom, but the doctor stopped me and said, "Send your parents back in." I walked back to the living room, and once I entered, I saw no one in there. So I turned around and headed towards my parents' bedroom. I could hear my parents talking. I placed my ear against the door, and what I heard shocked me. My mom said, "No, we are joining the rebellion. We have just lost 3 of our children to our fucked up lives. I refuse to lose any more of my children due to it." My father sighed heavily and said, "We didn't know Elena and Colleen would be affected by our actions." My mother said, "I know, but maybe we can somehow get them out of it before we attack. You know they deserve a normal life." He said, "I don't know, Athena. I want to leave this life behind as well." Afterwards, I knocked on the door and heard somebody walk towards me. And when my mom opened it, I said, "The doctor wants you back in there." They looked at each other and walked back towards Dana, Raina, and Raquel's room. I walked back to the living room and lay across the oversized couch. Then I closed my eyes. I woke up on the couch, hearing a knock on the door. I must have fallen asleep on the couch. I got up and walked towards the washroom, surprised to see Nathaniel at the door. I let him in and led him over to the couch. He said, "I'm sorry for what happened earlier, but my father ordered me to attack you. So I can understand your nervousness and letting me in." I looked at him and smiled as I said, "You were doing your job. Is that why you are here?" Nathaniel rubbed the back of his neck and said, "No, it is not." Then he placed his bag on the floor, unzipped it, and pulled out 2 files. He said, "You had forgotten these when you left." I glanced towards the files and then towards him as I said, "Oh, so your dad made you bring them. He must have been mad at me." Nathaniel looked at me and said, "He was wrong in this case, not you." I looked towards the ground and said, "I shouldn't have acted the way I did, but I can't change anything now. However, since you're here, do you want to help me?" He raised an eyebrow and asked, "Help you with what?" I smiled and replied, "Deciding if I want to go on this mission." He laughed and said, "Sure, I got plenty of time. Who do you want to start with?" I looked towards the files and said, "Nolan Sharp." He looked down at the files, grabbed them, and opened them. He didn't look happy about having to talk about his half-brother. He said, "Nolan Sharp. He is 12-year-old, goes to one of the elementary schools in the city. We don't know any details regarding his school yet. However, we know he also takes judo classes across the city. This is what he looks like." Nathaniel handed me his photograph. I looked at it and back up at him. Then I said, "He looks similar to you." He looked at me and said, with one of his eyebrows raised, "You think so?" I nodded in affirmative, and he saw my eyes lingering over the other folder, and he realized I didn't want to hear anything about his brother. He asked, "Are you sure you're ready for this file?" I looked over and asked, "Did you know my father had a son named Shane?" He looked over with a stunned look, then looked down towards the file in his hand and nodded his head in the affirmative without looking at me. He said, "I found out about it 3 weeks ago when I followed your father due to rumors regarding a rebellion." I looked at him with disgust and said, "Your dad thought he would rebel against his friend?" Nathaniel took a deep breath and said, "With rumors spreading around, no one can be sure." Which is what my father told me. I looked towards the file on the table and asked, "Is this his file?" He looked back towards the file, interlocked his fingers, and said, "Yes, it is." I continued to look at the file and said, "Tell me about him." He opened the file and looked at me as if he was waiting for me to protest. I said, "Come on, man. I need to know. He looked at me and said, "All right, I hear you. I will tell you about him, but you don't need to say yes to my father if you can't handle it." I looked deep into his eyes and nodded in agreement. He looked towards the file and said, "All right, his name is Shane Barrett. He is 21 years old, a local of the Mission District and known for being handsome and a man whore. He knows judo and looks as if he never lost a fight in his life." I looked at Nathaniel quizzically, as if he was trying to point out the last fact. I asked, "Why are you trying to emphasize the fact that he has never lost a fight?" He looked at me and smiled, his white teeth indicating he was happy about me noticing it. He said, "All three of you have a strong determination. I mean, Shane, Colleen, and you. You all have three-sided emblems on your body." I raised an eyebrow and asked, "Why does it matter? It's not as if it would make a difference in our world." Then he heard someone say, "Nathaniel, what are you doing here? Shouldn't you be busy protecting your father?" I raised an eyebrow and asked, "Why does it matter? It's not as if it would make a difference in our world." Then he heard someone say, "Nathaniel, what are you doing here? Shouldn't you be busy protecting your father?" Nathaniel stood up and said, "My apologies, sir. I was dropping these folders off to Elena." My father looked down at the folders. He looked at me and asked, "May I see the one in your hand? You are being very secretive about this mission." Nathaniel stood up and said, "My apologies, sir. I was dropping these folders off to Elena." My father looked down at the folders. He looked at me and asked, "May I see the one in your hand? You are being very secretive about this mission." I walked over to my dad, grabbed his arm, and said, "Dad, I don't think right now is the appropriate time for this. It will be hard for you to look at these folders." He glanced at me and said, "Elena, I already know what's happening. Tell him Ara will not be going on this mission." I looked towards Nathaniel as he shook his head and then said, "She will go on this mission if she doesn't have any issues with it. She will put an end to it for everybody's sake." I followed Nathaniel with my eyes as he walked towards the door and looked back at me, his blue eyes piercing into my soul as if 1,000 daggers were jabbing my skin. Then he swiftly turned back towards the door and walked out. My father's hands clenched into fists, and he started punching the table, yelling, "Damn it." My mom came running to his side. She grabbed his hand and stopped him from hurting himself. She asked, "What's wrong?" He tried to jerk his body away to get out of my mother's hold as she asked again, "What's wrong? Tell me." My father lifted his head and looked into my mother's eyes, and we saw his eyes were red and puffy, as if he had been crying for a long time. It would have been understandable due to everything happening around us, but he finally said, "I am their father, and I couldn't even protect Shane." They found him, and Gabriel tried to send Elena to kill him. Were you thinking about taking this mission, Elena? I glanced down towards the ground, moved my legs back and forth, and said, "Before I knew this, yes, I was thinking about taking it." "Why didn't you tell us about Shane, Dad?" He took a deep breath, looked at me with sadness etched in his eyes, and said, "No one was to know about it. Your mother didn't even know about it until after you were born." I never thought I would bear 3 children with 3-sided emblems, but I did. Moreover, in addition to this, I wouldn't have my friend target my oldest child and my 3 youngest children die. I looked at him and asked, "Did you want to give me up to Nathaniel for something in return? I know I did not have a normal life, but did you? I also want to meet Shane at least once in my life." He glanced up at me, expecting me to say something else, but I didn't. He said, "Fine, we will go to Berkeley tomorrow." My eyes widened with shock, and I asked, "Why Berkeley? Is he like a super smart man whore or something?" My father laughed at me and said, "Your brother is smart, but he is not a man whore." Then I held up the papers with Shane's information and said, "Dad, these papers say he is a dumb man whore jock who knows judo." Dad looked at the folder and said, "Don't believe everything you read." Then the phone started to ring. My mom walked over and looked at the caller ID. Colleen walked into the living room with a face stained with tears and said, "Mom." Our mom ran towards Colleen and pulled her into a hug as she rubbed her head, trying to comfort her. Dad eyed her as she held Colleen and asked, "Who was it?" Mom turned her eyes away from Colleen and said, "Gabriel, he can wait till tomorrow. We need to mourn the passing of our daughters and make decisions regarding the current events that just happened. My eyes widened as I recall my parents' conversation, which I overheard, and I knew I had to protest. Don't rebel against them. Gabriel already presumed you were going to. That was how Gabriel found out about Shane. It's the reason he had sent Nathaniel to follow. Dad dropped his hands to his sides and sighed as he said, "Damn it, Gabriel. Elena, whatever happens, you need to protect Shane and Colleen. Protect your family no matter what." I raised an eyebrow as tension grew inside me, and I asked, "Dad, what are you saying? Are you going to rebel?" He smiled and looked straight into my eyes. His blue eyes sparkle, and he looks down at the documents on the table. Then he said, "I want a favor from you." I hugged myself to stop from freaking out, hearing his response, and said, "Dad, you're scaring me." He eyed me and said, "I want you to go on the mission. Get to know Shane, and if Gabriel gets pissed, tell him you want to get close to him to make him trust you." I looked up at him with an eyebrow raised and said, "No, I can't." Dad leaned in so he was at eye level with me when he said, "My daughter, you can and you will. He will be staying at his mom's house this weekend. Tell Gabriel you will start the mission on Friday. I will call Shane's mom." I felt tears welling in my eyes as I asked, "Dad, why are you doing this? You wanted him to live a few minutes ago, and now you want me to kill him?" Then he smiled and said, "Yep, take Colleen with you." I stood straighter and asked, "What the hell? She's still training. She can't come with me." My mom looked at me angrily and said, "Watch your language, Elena. Colleen can be with you till you kill Shane." Then they looked at each other and nodded, as if having a silent conversation among themselves. As Colleen started to protest, they all got up and walked towards the bedroom. Dad stopped at the doorway and said, "Elena, call Gabriel tomorrow to tell him about the plan. I love you both." We looked at each other and said, "Love you too, Dad." Then he walked down the hallway towards the bedroom and shut the door behind him. Colleen and I soon followed after them.